Welcome back. I have a position that I found interesting from a game I played recently. I thought you might find it interesting as well. Here in this position, sorry, it was actually right here, I had evaluated the position as a draw, as even. The computer shows a slight advantage for my opponent, but less than 1 point. And my reasoning was that on the A and B files, we each have these two pawns, which in certain situations can get past each other, but for the most part, they're probably going to stay there. On the H file, we have these two pawns that can't get past each other. And here in the middle, we have these 4 pawns, which his 2 are kind of locked in because of my pawn and this bishop. And my two pawns are guarding the bishop. His knight is guarding this pawn from my rook. His king is guarding this pawn from my rook. His rook has control of the G file. My rook has control of the C file. And there's not a lot of movement that can be done. One really cool thing is that my king is functioning as a long-range piece here, protecting 2 separate pawns, because the rook can't infiltrate. So as long as I'm shuffling my king between these 2 squares, or a couple of moves earlier his rook was over here, I was also on this square. This, keeping his rook off of from coming down here. But anyway, I offered my opponent a draw in this situation, and perhaps rightly so, they declined it and made this move, which actually makes it closer to a draw than before, according to the engine. You can see there, as long as I make the right move, it's pretty close. Just a tiny little slip up and it's going to be dead even. So I briefly considered a b3 pawn push. I thought, take, and then I get this other pawn. And then these two, the A and B files would be completely cleared off of pawns. We would still be exactly even on material. And of course, at that point, his knight would be here and my rook would be here. So he would be forced to bring his knight back, or I don't know. He might bring his knight down here for trying to fork the king and bishop. But anyway, we would still be even on material. We would have, if he did come in and get the bishop, I would then, with these 2 center pawns would be locked up. I briefly considered that, and then I thought, what if before that I could get these pawns from behind? And I made a horrible blunder, which was this. And the reason at the time I thought, yeah, his knight can take it, but then I would capture back with check, right? But he saw right through it, of course. So now I've lost a whole piece. I can't save both of them. I decided to save the rook, which I did by moving here, knowing he can take the bishop, but the rook is safe, and then I'm going to get one of his pawns. So he took the bishop, I got one of his pawns, and now that's really odd. The computer is actually suggesting him to do that. Am I reading that right? Oh, yeah. Okay. That's what he should have done, because if I take, which I probably would, then he would have this. He would not only take a pawn, but then once I got out of check, he would get my rook too. Okay, well, that didn't happen. He took that pawn with his knight first, perhaps thinking of coming down this way. I got that H pawn out of the way, so now my H pawn is passed. I have my D pawn and my H pawn are passed pawns, and of course this one is passed. I decided to go toward that F pawn, and he got rid of one of my pawns over there. So now we're in this situation. And you can see that I've lost. As long as my opponent doesn't make a huge mistake, I've lost. So from what I thought was a draw, and what it was actually pretty close to a draw, now I'm just losing. Well, I decided to play it out. And here, surprisingly, I made the best move, or the move most recommended by the computer. But my opponent did not. My opponent played here, and now you saw the evaluation bar just rising up there on the left. As long as I make the right move, I have an advantage now. And I saw it. As soon as he moved there, I saw that this spot gives me a protected check, and then I win the knight. So I did that, much to my credit, and got the knight. So now we each have 3 pawns and a king and a rook. He's the only one that has connected pawns. I mean, they can protect each other. But I have 2 passed pawns, and so far he only has 1. He can force another one if he's careful, but I can win that pawn, which is probably why he made his next move. It's one of the moves, top recommended moves. So he protects his pawn and threatens my rook. Now right there, yeah, the computer's suggesting I go here, because then he then would have to go after my other pawn, because there's really no way he can protect this one. If he tries, if I move my rook here and he tries to protect that, well then I can start marching on this side. As soon as he comes over to take that pawn, I get this one. He can't bring his king because this pawn, right? But instead I went the other way. Instead of getting in front of that B pawn, I got behind this pawn thinking maybe I can come through here and force him down. I don't know. But now we are dead drawn, according to the evaluation, as long as everybody makes the right moves or pretty close to the right moves. But I blundered again. What I should have done, obviously, the computer's saying, hey, you still have a chance. You can still go over there. Give up this pawn for that one, because then you could also win this one, and you have a passed pawn. I mean, like this, right? Boom, boom, boom. He has to get out of check. I have a passed pawn. He has to go over here and capture that one. But that didn't happen either, because I blundered. I went out here, and then that was the right move, I think. I'm not that far behind. He doesn't make this best move. His best move here is check, because I can't come here, here, or here. And if he says check, these 2 squares will be covered as well. I have to get in front of this pawn, and then my king is cut off for the rest of the game, and my pawn can't advance because my king's in the way. But he didn't make that move. He made that move. So now it's even again. If only I do the right thing. Did I do the right thing? No. That wasn't a blunder, but the right thing would have been to push the H-pawn so that my king could hide behind it in the case of check. But again, I thought, hey, he's got to stop this pawn. His king's not in front of it anymore, so that's why I made that decision. But then he said the same thing. He says, well, you've got to stop that pawn. So I said, okay, well, you've got to stop my pawn. He said, no, you have to stop my pawn. So now I'm in a dilemma. I don't know if we're drawn or not. The engine says I could move the H-pawn here. But my thinking was, if I queen now, he'll take it, and I'll take his rook, but then he'll get a queen. So I decided to get in front of his F-pawn, which the computer says is fine. And here he should have put me in check, but he didn't. He went after my pawn that's not guarded now. So here I saw my opportunity. Now the engine says here I should take his pawn. But I decided if I queen and he captures it, then I capture it. And that's what we did. The engine didn't quite like it. But now I've got a passed pawn. His pawn's not passed yet. Again, it says he should check me, because I can't get in front of my rook, because then I would lose my rook when he checked me again. I have to get in front of the H-pawn. But he didn't check me. He started coming after this. This was my time, and I just assumed he would block with his rook. He obviously shouldn't have, because he's not in check. He should have come and put me in check, but he didn't. He did what I thought he would do. And now, it looks like a race, right? Well, it's my turn. But when I queen, he's in check. If he queens, if I just let it go, I'm not in check. And so we win a couple of moves. I let his pawn go. And then here he realized, oh, I'm going to be in check when he gets a queen. and that's where he resigned. So, from a position that I thought was drawn but was actually slightly losing, and my opponent declining to draw, I immediately blundered to make the game losing, but ended up winning due to some mistakes on my opponent's part. So hopefully you found that as interesting as I did, how some of these games can turn out, how many fascinating ways that it can go, and all the different options. Thanks for watching.